Hello, I am sorry this took me a little longer to get to you than I expected. I just got out of a training and got home, so I was able to have a few minutes to go over the slides for Friday, the today, which we missed class. So if we were meeting, these were going to be the agenda points, so I am going to kind of just review very quickly on Ant of the Self. We will talk about Ant of the Self in detail on Monday, but you do want to turn in the discussion question. So you want to read the story and submit those if you haven't already. The main things for this lecture are paragraph development and helping you brainstorm options for the essay, and looking a little bit at quoting and MLA format. So why does Spurgeon pick up his dad after he kicks him out of the car? This gets to these issues and ideas about obligation, fear for his father's future, or like what might happen with him. And a lot about also around how he felt like his friend, his other black friend at school, who was an athlete, would have just kind of shook it off and not let things get to him. So I think that's kind of a key piece you might want to look at. We talked a little bit about the Million Men March. You can kind of get that question. The Spurgeon one, a lot of this comes out when he talks to the guy at the bar, the bartender, some of the other pressures he's facing at home and at school. And then the ending is super powerful and kind of really demonstrates a lot. There's different ways to read the ending, so I'm curious what you're going to think about the ending of the story, and how you view Spurgeon's character at this point. And then this final scene, was going to be a discussion question. I think we'll still keep this one and do this discussion question in class. How does it relate to the development of his character, the scene where he calls him out on his dad's lies? But in moving to the next piece, which is the kind of rhetorical piece I want to remind you about, is that when you are doing body paragraphs for this essay, and again, this is more of a traditional essay, literary essay, you want to make sure you use a structure. Some teachers call it a pie structure, some say a T structure. I use T, but I added an extra E. So you want to start with a topic sentence that directly relates to your thesis statement. Maybe a sentence or two of explanation, some evidence, and that could be a quote or a paraphrase. You could, regardless of either one, you still have to cite. And then you might have two pieces of evidence if you're like comparing and contrasting or something. And so you may have a little transition between that. And then the final one should be an analysis, where you kind of look at what is the importance or impact of this evidence on this claim. Okay, so just as a reminder, when you're doing your topic sentences, you could actually label your outline like this so that you kind of, when your first draft, you keep on track. So it's something to consider. For comparison, like I mentioned, you could have evidence and then a transition and another piece of evidence. For example, you won't just have probably Ant of the Self and speaking in tongues, but if you did, you could have a topic sentence that would have both of them there, Spurgeon and Tia, and then an explanation about their differences, and then a quote, and then a transition, like an on the other hand, or however, then give, speaking in tongues, and then kind of have an analysis about what looking at both of these pieces of evidence shows us. So in class, this is what we would do, is I would give you this topic sentence, and then you would brainstorm a paragraph based off this. So this is still something you could do at home, and it might be really helpful to you. So if you were doing something comparative, the final draft of your essay won't have this probably, but it may have. So most of the essay prompts are going to have 3 stories required. There's one prompt where there's a story and a critical essay. Ant of the Self and a critical essay, but the other ones have 3, and so most people want to, depending upon which one you do, you may have to deal with 2 characters in one paragraph or 3. But this is a great example of like, how would you then brainstorm the structure of this? What evidence would you give about Tia's naivety, or what evidence would you give about Spurgeon's sarcasm or anger? So when you quote, you want to be really careful about some things and know what all your tools are. So first, all quotes have to be introduced. You can't just drop a quote in. You have to introduce it. You need to use exact words. You might also use ellipses, which are the 3 dots where you're removing a piece of the quote if it's too long and you want to just have something essential. You could also use brackets, which are like the parentheses that are square, and that's to indicate where you have replaced something from the original for clarification purposes. So for instance, instead of saying Black Panther, or sorry, instead of saying like the film, if you're quoting something and they're referring to Black Panther, in parentheses, in brackets, you might say Black Panther and replace the word film. It could also be for part of speech, like if one thing is a verb and you need to make it plural, that could be another way brackets are used. Single quotes can be used if the original item was quoted and then you are quoting that. You can change the original quote to single quotes. You got to make sure your quotes are cited. You have to have the right punctuation and content of the citation depending upon if it has an author or not. And then you need to analyze your quotes. You need to say something about them, and so you need to kind of connect them back to the topic sentence. So some different ways you can do it is either a fragment introduction, a complete sentence introduction, or embed the quote into your sentence. And there's 4 examples here, 2 different ones about whether a character says something or how the author writes something. If you use the author's name in the introduction to the quote, you only need the page number in the parentheses. If you use like the character's name, you still have to put the author's name in the parentheses. So you review those and let me know if you have questions about them. So you want to quote the exact words of the original. If you leave out a portion, you can use ellipses. If you have a complete sentence and then missing sentences and another complete sentence, it would look sort of like this one here where there's the period and then 3 dots. If you are taking out in the middle, it's just the 3 dots. If you're taking out in the middle of the sentence. Here's an example about replacing a word for clarity. Analysis after the quote. Like here's an example where I say, unlike the church, and in quotes, where everyone felt something she wished she could feel but didn't, on the bus, Tia is able to actively participate with others for a common cause. So that's the quote and a little bit of info. It's an embedded quote with the page number. I should actually here have Packer 144. And then after this, I say, this feeling of acceptance and being a part of a crowd leaves Tia feeling confident in her ability to establish a community for herself when she arrives in Atlanta. I probably, if I rewrote that, wouldn't have feeling twice, but you get the idea. What you want to avoid saying is, in this quote, you don't need those words. You just identify what's being talked about in the quote. You don't have to say, in this quote, or the character in this quote says. You just don't have to refer to the word quote, okay? So in class, we would have you choose a quote from the group paragraphs that you wrote and then add those elements. That would have been the class activity, which I think is still a good one. We may still add that back in on Monday. So for your homework, be ready to discuss and analyze your topic for choice. So you need to go to the final draft prompt area of short stories and look at all the options and then choose one of those that you want to use as your topic. And then in class, we're going to go over those. And then once you choose one, we're going to do that thing where we write a bunch of different thesis statements in practice. So you want to choose one and start reading the third story or the critical essay, which the file for that essay is under handouts in Canvas. Okay, I hope you guys had a good Friday and use the extra time to sleep in or do something fun or productive. I will be around this weekend grading, so if you have questions, feel free to reach out, and I look forward to seeing you soon. Bye.